Welcome back, everybody. Today we start with the new season of interviews for Ottolina English channel, and we start at that best, I'd say, because we have with us Professor Wolfgang Streeck, who's probably the most important German economist and sociologist. Director Emeritus of the Max Planck Institute. So welcome back, Wolfgang, and thank you very much for accepting again our invitation.
Thank you.
So I'd start with the results of the election in Thuringia and Saxony, because in a recent interview with the newspaper Die Zeit, the German newspaper Die Zeit, you defined the results of the elections as yet another sign of the crisis of democratic capitalism. So what did you mean with this definition?
Well, first of all, if you just look at the political system and the system of political parties, then you see a very familiar picture, which is not at all unique for Germany, which is that the center of the political spectrum, the traditional sort of conservatives and the traditional social democrats are all suffering, and that on either side of the political spectrum, there are new parties that represent the very different sort of sentiments or interests that were not represented in the center. And that's something, look at the Netherlands, look at France, look at Italy, in fact. It is pretty universal. Now, if that is so, then there has to be some sort of commonality in these political systems that, in spite of all the differences with respect to these new parties and the parties of the center, and that commonality is that we're talking about capitalist democracies, where one can say a number of crises have sort of simultaneously broken out, come to the fore, that are very difficult to handle for the traditional political centers and the government. In most of these countries, the physical infrastructure of the 1960s and 1970s is crumbling. The institutional infrastructure, the education system, the healthcare system, all of these are meeting their limits. And all of this sort of is involved in what I call a fiscal crisis of the democratic state, where in the last 20, 30 years, we've seen a rising level of public debt in all of these countries. Which is not at all Keynesian debt, because Keynesian debt is being repaid after the recovery of the economy. It is sort of building up, regardless of who was governing. It gets more and more and more, and now with rising inflation imposes very severe constraints on what these countries can do in order to deal with their problems, and these crises sort of spread in very different corners of the society. In France, in Germany, Italy, I think also one area where this shows is the non-urban parts of the country where the public transportation systems are breaking down, where healthcare systems. There, you don't even have a supermarket anymore if you don't have a car, and now you have to fight pollution. People are scared of they would not be able to use their cars anymore. There is a promise of replacement with public transportation, but who actually fulfill that promise, and so on and so on. So I think this is the thing. This is the point to start from. This sort of poly crisis, which now very much affects people in their places of residence, and this is where these new parties sort of thrive.
And yes, the second question is that because the winners the winners to these elections appears to have been Alternative für Deutschland and the Bündnis of Sarah Wagenknecht. And the mainstream media tend to bring them together and often demonize these two political forces under the same categories of populism, extremism, and so on. But we wanted to know what are instead, according to you, the most important differences between these two very different forces, actually.
Yeah, they are really very, very different. And one must say this anti-populist rhetoric is just sort of the last resort for political parties that do not know anymore what to offer their voters and how to handle the manifest problems of their society. They have been sort of trying to hide these building crises by, for example, holding the European Union responsible for what they couldn't do at home, or declaring what they were unable to do to be a European thing, like immigration and these things. The Germans were pushing off this sort of immigration problem to Italy, the other borderline countries, and then they were pretending that they were sort of doing the good things, and the other ones, as you know this story, and then suddenly there comes this thing about populism. The populists are parties in the rhetoric of the center that talk about things that the center thinks people should not talk about. and in Germany we do have we have a serious problem, not necessarily with immigration, but with the way in which our society is able to cope with increased levels of integration, to provide good schooling for the children of people coming into this country, to handle their needs in the labor market, to help them learn the German language. All of this is sort of a big mess hidden behind a lot of rhetoric. And if someone says something needs to be done about it, either we have to get some control over immigration, or we need to do something for people to prevent them from ending up in ghettos or in parallel societies, like happened in Sweden, for example. Yeah. Then they say, oh my God, that's populist and dirty. Before these elections, there is something about populism. Before these elections, a week before, some sort of Syrian refugee attacked people at a local how do you say, local festivity, and killed 3 people. 3 days later, the German government took I think 18 Afghans from German criminals who were in German jails, put them on a plane, gave each of them €1,000 so they couldn't complain, and then they sent them to Afghanistan on that plane, where they had been saying for years that you cannot send people to Afghanistan. These were not your normal refugees. They were actually criminals. And that was to document that they were doing something about immigration. It was the most populist lie, staging thing that you can imagine. And it was done by all the three governing parties together with the official opposition, the Christian Democrats, together. Yeah, in the hope that it could give people give voters the feeling that finally something was being done about a problem that these people were experiencing, and of course it didn't work. Yeah, one of the things that one really has to notice in all these things is that these attempts to sort of make people forget the real problems of these societies by opening up a front line between the decent Democrats and the indecent populists, and thereby increase the support for the decent Democrats. None of this works. It didn't work in France. It didn't work in Germany. It doesn't work in Germany. It didn't work, incidentally, in Britain either, and of course not in the United States, which are sort of a vast step in front of this development. It just doesn't work. My line is, unless we really, in the center of these political systems, become honest and explain to people that we have accumulated a number of problems that cannot be solved by tomorrow, and that will require some common effort in our societies that must be distributed in a just and fair and equitable way, so that the effort is not just on the part of the small people, but that the big ones will also have to contribute, and that raises a big problem of distribution and of social fairness that is always hidden by this strange demagoguery about we the Democrats, including the owners of Volkswagen and Porsche. I mean the owners of the companies, which is all part of the Democrats, and the misled populists who vote for dirty parties, and there you, as you said, the genuinely redistribution-oriented left party of Sarah Wagenknecht is sort of shamelessly put together with the AfD, which is a neoliberal party. If you look at their economic policies, yeah, they have nothing in common when it comes to economic policy, to the political economy, but they are merged into one thing because the AfD uses immigration in order to for demagogic purposes, whereas the AfD, whereas the Sarah Wagenknecht party actually understands that this is a thing for our society that we have to find some solution for. Otherwise, it sort of grows above our heads.
And from this point of view, one of the accusation that comes from part of the left in Italy, for example, but everywhere, is that Sarah Wagenknecht is like following the far right on the immigration issues, and so they call that that kind of party, that kind of position, like, I don't know if it's the right translation in English, but it's social chauvinism, no? Do you think it's correct? But there is a risk that, following too much the far right rhetoric on immigration, a redistributional point of view, and I mean the idea of confronting the problem without hiding it, but became something far from our left tradition and social democratic tradition.
If you take politics seriously, then apart from all the sort of virtue signaling and rhetoric, political realism tells you that let's, for practical purposes, just say that unlimited immigration sort of results in a backlash in the population that you do not want. Yeah, first point. Now, who is able to see that backlash and who is willing to prevent it? I would say that the AfD is basically benefiting from this, and they have no real interest to do much about it. They are happy with the impotence of the green red parties in the center to do something. Whereas if you look at the leading personnel of Sarah Wagenknecht's alliance, many of them have immigration background. There are sort of people with Italian names, with Turkish names, with Sarah herself in her when she was young in the GDR, sort of was discriminated against by the fact that she doesn't look like a normal German. Yeah? Now they know two things. One, how difficult it is. They have made it in this society, but they also have seen lots of people who did not make it, sometimes in their own family. And they also know what a huge effort you have to make against the odds if in a society there is this anti-immigrant sentiment that comes from people feeling that there is too much there. Yeah. Now I would suggest that one should listen to people who have gone through the experience of immigration, of learning how to live in a society like Germany and to be successful. They know what is required for the others to be able to have the same success in this society, and they see that now, beyond a certain level of immigration, a distribution battle begins between the people sort of who are already there and those who are coming. Now then you can have a moralistic and a realistic perspective on this. The moralistic perspective is to try to re-educate those who see that their schools are deteriorating and all of this, and tell them that they are racist and fascists if they complain about it. Yes? Or alternatively, you can say, let's make clear that there is a job to do for our society to be not just formally open, but also to be materially open, so that everyone has the same kind of chance in our society. And then I'm a sociologist, so when I was a student at Columbia University, one of my teachers, I'm not talking about Zioni now, someone else, Peter Blau, who was interestingly also Jewish, and he was Austrian, and then as a young man escaped to the United States and fought in the American army against the fascists on the German continent. Now, his lifetime theme was the new arrival in a society and what it means to arrive in a new society. So, for example, his his doctoral thesis was about a working group in a employment office somewhere in upstate New York, where he studied in a very sort of meticulous way what happened to the newcomer. There was a group, the group had been sort of used to work with, but what was it that the newcomer had to do in order to understand how he could fit in? And we're talking about America now, about Americans. But in his in his meticulous analysis, which was his dissertation, which he later sort of worked again on, was this problem of the newcomer having to show to those that are already there that they can be trusted and that they can make a contribution to the society, and that in order for others to trust him or her, then they have to make a particular effort in order to show. And this was a theme that he sort of, social integration, we call it as how does social integration work? And it is not given for free. It is sort of something that requires some sort of effort. Also willingness on the part of those that have to take you in. So there has to be a sense of, yes, we need someone else. Let's inspect this guy. What can he do? What and so on and so on. So I could very much feel like sympathy with this sort of understanding, because I was born in 1946 in a refugee camp in Germany, and my family never really made it into the new society. I did, but my family never. They sort of moved around and weren't able to really make friends, and so on. The family had broken apart. I can say two things. One is that I understand that integration is not easy. And the other thing is that it is possible if there are certain conditions, and that these conditions are politically shaped. That something has to be done about it. We could have a sort of entire seminar on this problem, which I don't want to go into too much, but I just want you to understand that virtue signaling, like let everybody come, is totally inadequate to this. There need to be conditions that make the society able to take people in. For last remark on this, in all of our societies in Western Europe and advanced capitalist societies, also including countries like Japan, there is an urgent need for immigration. Why? Because our birth rates are going down, and they have been going down for 20 or 30 years now. Italy is a very particular example, but it is the same thing for Germany and even France. And now you can say that that's an indecent subject and you don't talk about it. But as a sociologist, I have no compactions about this. This is a very interesting phenomenon in our society. So the one aspect of this is that we really should be open to immigration. The other aspect, however, is also that if we don't have children, and then we sort of siphon off the intelligent, active, enterprising people from other societies, or Africa is a very, very good example here, then we are not doing good to those societies. So we have to learn to do something, how to compensate them for the migration to our country, and then you look at trade regimes. We're awful what we do to these societies by forcing them to import stuff from our countries that they could produce very, very well themselves, like in agriculture. and so on and so on. And then you begin to really seriously think about this problem of the reproduction of our societies in a global environment in which we do not want to damage other societies. We also want to do something for them, and we want to maybe create a situation where both they and us benefit. But sort of simplistic moral rhetoric does not solve anything in this context.
Sure. And I had just one last question on this topic, Wolfgang. Then we can talk about maybe with about the foreign policy, but about this. And also about the differences and similarities between the Sarah Wagenknecht party and the AfD. In your interview with the Zeit, you talked about this main problem that people are kind of tired and not satisfied for this concept of democracy, liberal democracy, just founded on abstract norms and principles. And in some way, both those parties have a different concept and idea of democracy, more founded on a communitarian concept. So the idea that a community must be founded on social boundaries, even tradition and identity, and so on. And in case of Sarah Wagenknecht party, of course, also on welfare, social redistribution, and so on. So this is one question, if you agree with this. And the second is this. The reason why immigration is always the main electoral topic instead of economic issues is because in the last years also the mainstream media, the mainstream parties wanted in a way always hide the economic relations that we have in a society and let the people dispute and vote just on cultural and values and identities matters. It can be, and that's why now these anti-systemic parties, the right anti-systemic parties, have in a way an advantage to the left ones, because are those that now bring to the public opinion more these cultural and identities values instead of the economic ones.
Yeah,
I don't know if I was
no,
clear.
I think you put this very well. I would say that in any society, economy, what we call the economy of that society, is embedded in culture, in social relations, and in different ways. Capitalism is an economic regime that tries to sort of suck up the social part of social life and restyle it sort of in terms of a capitalist exchange relationship. That's what Marx calls the subsumption of under capitalism. In any case, the economy cannot be discussed as just an abstract rational work and exchange relationship. People connect their identities to their position in the economy. Sometimes they see themselves as genius capitalists. Sometimes they see themselves as members of a working class that has to have solidarity or something. In that sense, it is not unimportant for political economists to understand how social bonds and social identities, how they form in a society, and how and what influence. There, I think there are two or three things that one needs to understand as a basis for reflection on this. One is there's never a society without a tradition. It is totally impossible to think we are refounding our Europe or Germany from tomorrow on. It's something. No, we have to. Anything we do in the context of a tradition into which we were born. The society that never dies. We die. Our parents die, but the society in which we live doesn't die. We have to do something with it. We have to change it. Capital, if you want to use this as an agent, capital does a lot about changing the tradition of our societies. Yeah, they want less solidarity, more efficiency. Then we as human beings, we have family relations. We have relations to our neighborhood. We don't want to move every 3 years to new jobs somewhere else. We have social bonds. Yeah. Now, this in other words, first of all, first principle, you cannot live without tradition. You have to work with it. You have to change it. You have to adapt it. Sometimes you have to reject it. But this is the creative process of forming a society. You don't start from zero. I say that as a German with the baggage of the German tradition sort of on my back, but I cannot say I'm not from here. I'm from here, and I have to live with it, and I have to use it, and for sort out the productive aspects of it and forget about or put into the background the other. So that's number one. The other is when you say, yeah, well, this is general for all human beings, and there are no societies. There's only mankind. Then my answer is that that also goes to the anthropology of the young Karl Marx. The human beings are sort of differ from other animals by the fact that they can have a huge variety of expressions, so to speak. You can be an Inuit. You used to call them Eskimos, and at the same time you can be you can be a camel nomad in the Sahara. Yeah, these are we are both completely identical brains. Everything. If you take a baby from there, raise them somewhere else, then they become exactly where they were raised. But that means that no human society can exhaust all the possibilities that humans have to express themselves with the capacities that they have. If you grow up in Pakistan and you grow up in Sicily, then you catch different aspects of this potential. At the European level, or at the world level, in fact, you later have to find ways how these differences can be brought into productive contact. Productive, not imperialistic. Amicable, not hostile. Yeah, that's what you call that's what international politics. And international, there is no way, I say, to reconceptualize relations between people as relations within one big human society. There's a specificity to intergroup relations, which is different from the relations between individuals in a different country. Yeah. In other words, it is quite justified to take into account that in all human history that we've seen different manifestations of the human potential in different societies. And sometimes we don't like this manifestation that we observe in some other country. But what we have to find out, especially now, as everything sort of has gotten into contact with everybody else, how can we live in peace together? Yeah, when the Spaniards conquered Mexico, they encountered a very different sort of manifestation of humankind. What resulted from it was a huge bloodbath. Yeah, because the ones had horses and the others didn't. To simplify the problem, yes. But now we cannot afford this kind of slaughter anymore, simply because it is too dangerous, and therefore, out of the recognition of the multitude of human possibilities arises the realization that we need to find ways to avoid killing each other in the encounters between our societies. Alessandro, you touched on foreign relations, on international relations briefly in your question, and I already arrived there simply by emphasizing the differences that out of the local traditions arise from. I've lived in my life in 3 or 4 societies. I lived seriously in these societies, in the sense I say I paid my electricity bills myself, so to speak. I wasn't in a hotel, and I lived there for a longer time, and I worked there. 10 years or 12 years in the United States of my adult life. And I can say that you never cease being astonished about these little things that are different in a society that you have to learn before you can function there. Yeah. I lived in Italy for 2 years. I lived in the United States for a short time in Britain, for a short time in Spain. If you're not totally dogmatic ideologically to say that it's all the same, then you suddenly realize that there are codes of conduct, conceptualizations of social life that differ, and that we call about Europe. That is inside Europe. We're all speaking dialects of Latin. Yeah, the same language. But when you go to a place where we're further away, then we have to simply take into account the sort of bizarre example, if you wish, or depressing example, better. The United States waged a war in Afghanistan for 20 years, 20 years war. They spent an unbelievable amount of money on that war. And when they left, 3 days later, the local powers that be had taken over the country. Yeah, they could not eradicate this tradition and this identity, which we find in many ways unacceptable. But how could you have to talk them out of it with? I mean, not even the United States for 20 years were able to do that. Yeah, no, that's my point. I mean, simply recognition of the fact that there are differences that we have to manage, with which we can work. We can cross borders. It is not so, as you see in people in Sarah Wagenknecht's party, who grow up in Turkey and then they become political leaders in Germany. Yes, it is possible, but it takes an effort, and it is not the normal case.
And that brings us to the theme of multipolarity. I wanted to ask you one question is if foreign policy played a role in the regional election in Thuringia and Saxony, and if from this point of view of multipolarity, AfD and Sarah Wagenknecht parties could find a similar approach, or say, a kind of alliance towards, mainly the war in Russia, but also in relation to what should be the relation between the European Union and the national state of Germany, no?
Yeah, I think let me say, in my work since the 1980s, my sort of thinking about Europe and this has sort of really changed. I was a strong supporter of what is called European integration, in the sense that I thought, for example, in order to defend the European welfare state, it would be useful to have some sort of international government that would sort of bring all of us to the same level. But that was at a time when the European Union was, I think, 10 members, 10 member states. Now 27. The concept of ungovernability immediately arises. More than that. Whereas at the time we could still hope for some sort of responsible supranational government, becoming responsible not only on paper, but in terms of a democratic demos, a public that can actually tell them to do what they should do. Yes, that has totally gone, and it has been replaced with the nation states shedding their genuine responsibility for the well-being of their countries and their populations, because things became too difficult for them. Moving on paper that responsibility to the European supranational level, in order not to be asked anymore to do something about it. In other words, my priority now would be to restore democratic accountability. And I have given up the hope that could happen with respect to Frau von der Leyen in Brussels. The technocratic regime that has established itself in Brussels, which is basically a regime of empty promises. Yeah, think about this. The 700 billion fund that they set up, and Italy was to get 100 billion for this recovery program. They even sent an Italian prime minister from Brussels, Mario Draghi. But look around in Italy. Where do you see the results of this? Yeah, it is a symbolic thing that gets lost in enter in a sort of technocratic mess stretched out over years. And now they say we need to prolong it because we haven't seen anything. And what can you do in order to tell Brussels that they cannot govern Italy? Italy has to govern itself. And what can you do in order to tell your countrymen and countrywomen that the illusion that Brussels will do something for them, maybe by melting Germany in order to do something for Italy? No, the answer is they won't. The question is to hold your own government responsible. In order for that to be possible, you need national sovereignty, the sovereignty of the nation state. if our governments tell we don't have that sovereignty anymore because we've given it to Frau von der Leyen, then become very, very suspicious, because what they really mean is we don't know what to do for you, and we have given up on doing something for you, and then we have invented this character which is called Frau von der Leyen to solve all your problems. Yes. No,
like the Invisible Boss. There was a movie some years ago, The Invisible Boss, and all the
yes, and it is invisible in the sense that if you look at the practical results, it is quite visible if you look at the television news, where they always pretend that now take the European Union. Now, they have promised to Ukraine, first of all, to build it up from scratch. Frau von der Leyen, it will be more beautiful than ever before. Ukraine, this is sort of 60 million people. Plus the next wave of the recovery fund, again 750 million. They are now talking about. Then increasing the number of members from 27 to 36 by taking in the Balkans, even Georgia. Yeah, all of these promises are obviously either completely illusory, or they would require a rebuilding of this European Union that has been made deliberately impossible by building the structure not on a constitution, but on a treaty between the member states, where it takes one member state to prevent any change in the constitution of this strange character, of this strange institution. So you look at what are you being told about the future, and you see empty promises. Yeah, it does not surprise me, because I think, and now we really get from the political surface to the underlying political economy. What I think we are all faced with is what I call, I mentioned that, the fiscal crisis of the state. That is not to be simplified. What it really means is this. Capitalism as a private business economy sort of requires an increasing input of public sources, public resources, in order to be able to function. The governments, states have to clean up the environment. Government states have to take care of providing a skilled labor force. They have to securitize the credit that these firms take up, because they don't trust anymore the future, and therefore they need some sort of central bank assistance, making them more confident. You go through and you see, and then of course the so-called defense, keeping open the trade routes with navies. All of this costs a lot of money. At the same time, you see that the taxes that can be levied on companies and on the rich sort of are declining. Why? Because now in this sort of global economy, it is very easy to pull your money out of Italy and put it into wherever you want to put it. Where is fiat these days? Where are the Agnellis with their wonderful factories? Yes, very good question. They are no longer in Italy, or they could go out any time, whatever they have left there. Yes, so yes, we have a problem in the sense that capitalism becomes ever more expensive for society, while at the same time refusing to finance the costs of its own continuation by paying taxes for it. Yeah. Now we have invented all sorts of strange devices in order to fool ourselves about this problem. For example, beginning in the 1980s, the Americans deregulated their financial system so that first governments could sort of take up more credit from them. Before, that was sort of allowed only to up to a minimum level, which would have been used for a Keynesian thing, but not for this kind of permanently increasing. Yeah. And then in the 1990s, they also made it easier for individuals to indebt themselves because wages were stagnant, and the social benefits were being cut, so that people had to replace parts of their income and parts of their social wage by borrowing. Yes. So here, I think, if you look at these relevant statistics, like how much do companies pay for the states where they operate? How much do states need in order to clean up after capitalism, or sort of make it possible for capitalism to function? Yeah. And how have they solved this sort of scissors that are opening all the time? By borrowing. Now, borrowing is a good thing, but it can't go on forever. Yes, there is a moment, there will be more. Now our wonderful economists were telling us 2 years ago that if we increase our productivity in line with debts that we take up, then that's fine. Yeah, they didn't think about inflation. Suddenly we had inflation. Inflation makes repaying your debt extremely expensive, and extremely expensive. It also makes it necessary to borrow more. So now we suddenly find that this is not the solution of all problems. But then, from a political economy perspective, I would say, tell me what the other solution would be. And the alternative is not obvious. It is not obvious. And especially, yeah, the other days I discussed this with someone, and he said, yeah, well, you can also fund your economy through central bank money rather than capital market money. The answer is yes, but how do you get there? And what happens if you start getting there? And who will withdraw their capital from your country if you start doing such a thing? And what will the United States say, which sort of fund themselves by other people borrowing the dollars that they print? Yeah. In other words, hidden beneath the surface of this sort of ridiculous struggle of Democrats versus populists, yeah, hidden below the surface is a deep uncertainty as to how our societies are going to cope with the needs of capitalism to be subsidized by the societies that capitalism at the same time sort of sucks the resources out. We have unbelievably increasing inequality for 20 or 30 years. A guy like Elon Musk would have been totally impossible 30 years ago. You couldn't even think about it. Yeah. Now he is able to switch off the satellite communications for the Ukrainian army because now he has, I don't know, 250 satellites sort of surrounding the globe. Yes. Now call this capitalism, call it democratic capitalism, there is a question mark behind it, because it seems that it is not democracy that rules capitalism, but capitalism that rules democracy. Yeah, and to me, this is. So then they set up this fake struggle against the populists, where we all are Democrats. This incredible moralization of politics, whereas underneath you look into something really, really serious. Yeah, and you don't have to only talk about the environment. Yes, there is absolutely a problem here, but there are other problems as well. How do you make sure that you have a workforce that actually wants to work in the precarious employment situation that prevails now in our societies, and what sort of social provision do they need? Social policy becoming more and more expensive. Why? Because you have to maintain the willingness of people to play by the rules of this changing economy. Yeah. In Germany, family policy, which is sort of supposed to create an incentive for people to have children, so it's becoming more and more and more and more expensive, but children are becoming fewer and fewer and fewer and fewer over the decade. Yeah, because in part the requirements of working in this precarious environment are such that people take a long time until they feel safe enough to bring up a family, and many of them never get there, or they just got into the habit of not having children and like it. For example, yeah, that if you come back to political economy, there you see this intertwinement of the democratic surface, the social structure of mutual rights and obligations, which you call a society, and the underlying requirements of the reproduction of that society through an economy where the capital is owned by private owners who have unlimited mobility all over the world.
No, this was the answer to the second part of the question, but I wanted to know also your opinion about the first one, that was if foreign policy played a role in the election, and if both the AfD and Sarah Wagenknecht, the political parties, they could find some kind of common path towards a more multipolar attitude towards the world. So a post-globalized world, and from this point of view, if there can be a dialogue between these two so different forces, or if, as in the immigration theme, one is rhetoric and the other one is difficulty trying to find a way.
I think I understand your question, but I cannot see sort of rational dialogue with a party like the AfD. The AfD sort of lives on up to now on resentment and on symbolic politics, whereby once in a while sort of showing some proto-fascist symbol, they think that this sort of attracts enough anger to their party, whereas I mean, Sarah Wagenknecht and many people around her are really capable of thinking seriously about our society. There's no serious thinking in the political economy plays no role whatsoever in the AfD. It's all sort of moral symbolism.
there are more
war.
similarities with the CDU then? Do you think that there are kind of more similarities with the CDU?
But
Sarah Wagenknecht
Alessandro, the difference is that the CDU is closely linked to business and capital, whereas business and capital will not have nothing to do with the AfD for sort of reputational reasons, but also because they are they are now threatening. If the AfD becomes part of a federal state government, they will sort of withdraw their capital from that place. That's a fundamental difference to 1933, when the Nazis were funded, supported by big industry. Yeah, the industry now is firmly aligned, also in part with the Social Democratic Party. Volkswagen is more a social democratic firm than a Christian democratic.
Sorry, Wolfgang, is there not a part of, I mean, maybe more small productive forces and capitalists that they look very, I mean, preoccupied by the energy prices and all the factor that has brought Germany to a huge economical crisis that we are assisting now. I mean, there is not the AfD. It's not also a way to give a political representation to this part of the productive forces in Germany. Is just symbolic and rhetoric, or
no? If I understand your question right, the business is expecting, a big business is expecting to be supported not by the AfD but by the Christian Democrats and in part the present government. There's a sort of underground struggle with the United States over our trade relations with China. The big firms want sort of that relationship to be healthy for them. Yes, if you look a little deeper, then it is interesting that again, mentioning Sarah Wagenknecht, Sarah wrote her doctoral dissertation on small firms in Germany, and she has this on the left very often sort of misunderstood. Sort of how is admiration in part for the sort of very productive small family firms in Germany that are operating all over the world, and so this is much more the constituent this is where she tries to develop a constituency into business, but not with the large ones, but with those who need local support through a good infrastructure, a good education system. In fact, also well-regulated immigration. And if you go to one of those firms, you'll see among the younger workers on the shop floor who are going through apprenticeships, very often they are from Arab or American or African countries. Yeah. These people, this is a sort of business that still sees the production process with their own eyes, whereas the bankers and investors never see that. They only see the bank account at the end. Yeah, and it is what you say, multipolarity. It is, I think, a fact that the world will be less globalized in the future than it was until the Ukrainian war. In fact, I would say until 2008. In my latest book, which has come out with Feltrinelli, yes, it has already come out with Feltrinelli. I have shown that that global trade and global investment have begun to decline already after the financial crisis in 2008. They weren't growing anymore. Why? Because people were seeing that a globalized economy is not governable. You have to have supply chains that are not too long, so that you can sort of maintain that context. I would think that there will be now the force that is trying to prevent this sort of breaking up of the globalized economy is the United States, and for them a unipolar world is identical with a globalized economy, the world market. I don't think, however, that the United States will be able to get that done. As a result of which, there will be sort of maybe a bipolarity. I hope, and we all, I think, hope, multipolarity would be even better, where European countries can learn to play a productive role in a niche of the world, which might resemble what during the Cold War was the unaligned, non-aligned countries, yeah, and that was quite a successful thing up to a point, and what I call the alignment of the non-aligned, and there both would be a very genuine interest in peace, in a functioning United Nations regime, plus the capacity, unlike in the unipolar world, not only to have open markets, but also to have an industrial policy defined by national traditions and needs, which would allow you to pursue an independent economic policy in those sectors in which you want to, rather than this old World Trade Organization thing, where you couldn't do basically anything but open your borders. Yeah?
Of course.
That's a different question, and we could discuss this sometime else. But it is my impression. It is my impression that we're, if we are lucky, we can have a world in which the restoration of economic sovereignty, in addition to political sovereignty, will be possible, and that would be also good for domesticating what is now the global capitalism of Elon Musk and others.
Yes, we really hope so. Wolfgang, thank you. Oh, probably you lost me for a second. Wolfgang, thank you very much for this conversation. It's always a big pleasure listening to you, and we really hope that we'll have other opportunities to host you in this channel.
Thank you very much for having me. It was a pleasure.
Listen to us.
When Sarah will win the national election.
Of course. No, we hope even soon, even earlier.
Thank you so much, Wolfgang.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.